very good evening to you. Welcome to another Newsmaker Live broadcast right here on DBS Television. My name is Timothy Polion. We'll be together until 10 o'clock this evening, at which time we'll be concluding with the clip that peaked. From yesterday, we decided to focus on school guidance counseling that is taking place within the island's education sector. And it was just this afternoon, just following the news in the United States, in South Florida to be exact, we understood of news of some incidents occurring there where a student who had been expelled, well, he ventured onto the compound of that learning institution and claimed some 17 lives. Is that something that could happen in St. Lucia? That's one of the issues we'll be discussing on this evening's Newsmaker Live. And we have an individual who's well placed to focus on this and other related matters in the island's education system, acting coordinator for guidance and counseling in the Ministry of Education, Joycelyn Eugene. Last week, the island's group of counselors who are working within the education system, they had a special week of activities. Welcome to the broadcast, ma'am.
Thank you.
You've just over the last few minutes been focusing on doing your own research on what has happened at the school in South Florida. And it might seem far-fetched, but is that something that could land on our doorsteps at some point in time, where you have those incidents occurring in the education system in the United States, where dozens of people and students are killed for one reason or the other? In this case, as I said just moments ago, 17 students were gunned down fatally and at least 14 were injured. In the case of St. Lucia, what are we facing?
We would really hope that something like that doesn't happen in St. Lucia. However, when you look, we don't know much of the details of what happened. We know that the student was expelled for disciplinary measures. One of the things is that, what is it that he was going through? Was he angry with whom? With the school, with the system? You know, these types of things. Sometimes when persons reach a place where they feel as if they're backed into a corner and there's no way out, there's nobody listening to them. You know, there's so many things that could go through a person's mind to cause them to find themselves in a place where they want to retaliate. And, you know, the story can only be told by the young man, what prompted him to do something like that. So when it comes to St. Lucia and our students, I would say we have angry students. We do have angry persons. We have experience over the, you know, in the past few years where you've had students who have attacked teachers and that kind of thing, you know, but we would hope it would not be something of that magnitude.
Are we sufficiently equipped to deal with those troubled students, those students who have their own challenges, which certainly need remedying, who need counseling?
I think that we do have services and agencies and, you know, those that can serve the students. Whether we are using them efficiently and effectively to meet the needs of the students, that may be something else. But I do think that we have a lot of available to students.
How do you go about identifying those students who are in need of that special attention?
Well, okay, so when it comes to school counseling, right? School counseling really deals with the main components of the student development: academic, their personal, social, and their career development towards school success. In the process of doing that, you may encounter children who are having difficulty in one way or another. So if they're having difficulty with their academic development, you will see it maybe in their failing grades, you will see it in their poor reading ability and all of those types of things. When you see that, then it means that this could be identified by the teacher in the classroom. It may be identified by a parent, and or someone who could make a referral to the counselor to provide support in that area. So the counselor would be working along with the teacher to help get that child the help. When it comes to their personal and social development, again, you're looking at the emotional competencies. You have different developmental levels. So you know that a child who is 3, 4, and 5, or 5 in a kindergarten class may have a tantrum. You don't expect a 13, 14-year-old to have a tantrum that same way, but they will act out. You understand? And so when you observe their behavior and you recognize maybe they are not using the effective skills that they need for them to be able to, let's say, make decisions, for them to problem solve, for them to resolve conflict. These are the things that create red flags for us, and then of course we try to provide the support.
Are we always that scientific in our approach and precise and deliberate?
We should be, especially in education, because we recognize that children are growing in stages. They go through developmental changes. Our education program is designed to be able to identify what is, I would want to say, normal for children at various levels of their education, and of course to recognize when these milestones are not being met.
So why therefore after students have graduated from a secondary schools on the island, that they on the job in the workplace, in social gathering and settings and so on, they display that kind of deviant behavior? It stands to reason that maybe it presented itself very late, or in terms of the education system, that the authorities did not capture that kind of behavior and remedy it and deal with it.
If we could hold the education system solely responsible for the development of the child, we could say that. Children are coming from homes, they're coming from communities, they're coming from families, and groups and so on. When they come into the school, a lot of the times they're coming with certain things already laid out in their, in their development, in their psyche, because you hear a person saying, that's how we do it at home, that's how it's done in my family, things like that. So when they come into the school environment, then the teacher now uses some of that to help nurture and shape them into what we would want to see, But you also have to recognize that each person has a personal responsibility. So the children themselves are making decisions as they mature, as they grow, as they get to secondary school. They're going through so many different changes, identity crises, and all of those things, and they really have to come to a place within themselves to determine who they want to be and how they want it to express themselves.
Is there therefore a role for parents? And do you think that the state should assist in terms of educating the parents to confront those challenges, because those are not normal things?
Definitely, but again, parenting now, I want to believe, is different to parenting when I was a child, in that now you have so many other things competing for giving, teaching children all kinds of habits and things. When my mom said curfew 6 o'clock, we didn't ask why, and we didn't, Now you have so many reasons why children may be out at 6 o'clock. Some of them are in lessons, they're in all kinds of classes at all hours, that keeps them out. And for others, they may not be as engaged, but then we are not as tight in terms of that type of thing when it comes to.
Do you think that the system is designed basically to weaken, for lack of a better word, the power and the influence that parents would have over the children right now? Because, for example, corporal punishment, you're advised as a parent, please do not administer corporal punishment because it's doing more harm than good. It was administered in days of yore, at the whim and fancy of parents without anybody challenging them. Do you think those are contributing factors where parents have basically lost that right to discipline the children?
I wouldn't say that. I think what it is giving us more options and other ways of dealing with discipline and correcting our children.
Are you against corporal punishment?
I do not recommend corporal punishment.
So what kind of punishment then?
I believe that we can, for example, I have my two sons. I have one who's 25 and the other one who is 11. And I don't have that experience with them, simply because I guess maybe a person might say, well, okay, you know what, you went to school, you did certain things and so on, you're a counselor, and so that's why. But I think one of the reasons why I never beat my children is because I remember some of the beatings that I got. And I said to myself,
but somebody will tell you it did not hurt you. Maybe it contributed to your success.
Not necessarily. I think it hindered a lot of things for me, in that I would hesitate for fear of being beaten, not necessarily because I understood why I did not need to do this thing, or to make a better choice. So a lot of times children operate from fear of being beaten. You also have a situation where a child will go and they will extend themselves. They know they will get beaten. So they'll take the licks. There's some children, they get beaten all the time, so they become dull to it after a while, and it's difficult now to teach that child and to shape that child, and then they become angry, violent, among other things. You know, you hear person saying, "Oh well, my mother used to beat me and it didn't harm me," but that's why we remember it up to a day like today. We go back to it, and we tell ourselves it's okay, and we continue to move on.
But do you think there are instances where it can be administered? You're saying do away with it completely?
Um, Again, I think when it comes to, especially now, with the wealth of experience, the wealth of services that we have available, the supports that we have, that with teachers, with schools, and all of those things, I think it's something that can be done away with. I think children now have a lot more that they are aware of. They can be exposed to a lot more understanding. You know, you have conversation with children that when we were growing up, you were not, you would not get coming from a child, because you are not allowed to think that far in any case.
Is why? Because they're more enlightened?
Because they're more enlightened, they're more, there's more information available
But
to
with
them.
that enlightenment, don't you think they are more likely to get involved in deviant behavior as a result?
But that's where the parent comes in, because you have a responsibility to give the children age-specific information. So a lot of the times, children become overstimulated. They get more information than they need, and we're a kind of a people like that in St. Lucia. We want all the details, and we tell them all the things. They don't need to know all the details all the time. When it comes to certain things that we get into,
Things like
we
what?
want to discuss. For example, we are very sexually explicit, and children don't need information that's not.
But don't you think they'll be exposed to it anyway?
They will, but we were exposed to it at some point. They will
But
be
not to the
exposed to it.
extent, not to extent that our students and children and young people are right
It's
now
available.
with social
So,
media.
Yes, it's
and the
available
internet.
with social media. So, for example, my son, I will guide him. I will, tell him what he's not allowed to watch. You still do the very same steps of parenting. You may want to be a little more alert, if I can say that, because you know that the influence is higher now than then. So we didn't have television before, but we do now. We didn't have internet, we have that internet now. You teach them to manage themselves, the use of the internet, the amount of time that they spend on the internet, where they are allowed to go. And if they deviate from that, as children would, because curiosity brings us in that direction, you do not condemn them as if they are criminals for having done that. You understand that that is the natural curiosity of a child, and then you have to pull them back in. And you develop the values of trust and other things with your child.
But it seems to be very painstaking, and you have to be methodical in your approach to this.
Yes, because you are training a child. If you're training police officers, it's painstaking. You take them through the steps, you make them go over again, you repeat those things and so on, because you want them to exhibit a particular
But
behavior.
who's preparing the student? Who's preparing a mother and a father for parenthood?
Now, again, I can say now, we have parenting programs in schools. Ministry of through family court, their parenting sessions that's done with parents, the school counselors.
Is it really
Part of their
widespread?
program. It's widespread. It's where students are. You have at preschools, I know that sometimes they have the different programs for parents. At kindergarten level, when they have the meeting, parents are being guided and they are being told and so on. Maybe now you have parenting from a different, a different angle, if I can put it like that, because your grandmother is a young grandmother who is out, who has her own life kind of thing, and she's not at home necessarily taking care of children as we would have had before. You do not have the strength of the extended family in a lot of cases where you had the aunts and the uncles and persons who would be there to provide the support that the parent needed. So when I had my son, then I knew that I had my sisters and I had persons who, if I needed to go, he had somewhere to be safe and that kind of thing. Now a lot of people are left with their child and they have to take them and find places. When they have to go to work, they're not sure, they leave them unattended at home and that type of thing.
How much is the role does peer pressure play in determining what a child does, irrespective of the kind of upbringing that he or she gets at home? that is very commendable on the part of the parents.
Peer pressure has kicks in at a certain age, mostly. You have children who are, okay, so let's start at the kindergarten level and so on. They're into their own self. They're very self-centered in terms of how they interact with their friends and so on. Their things, my book, my this, my that, my the other. They're not necessarily influenced by their peers. As they get older, then you see the boys begin to click with the boys, girls begin to click with the girls, and they're really just trying to understand themselves in terms of the varying gender. When they become teenagers now, identity and all of that is important to them. Their peer group is more important than their parent group, because again, they're coming into an individuation of themselves, who they are and who they intend to be as a person. You understand? And so that is where the peer pressure comes in. Depending on how, again, from the time they were small, they've been socialized and they've made friendships, then they will follow they will get together with the group of persons who best complement what it is they want to aspire to. That's what it is. So if they're sports minded, then they will want to be involved in sporting clubs and so on, and they will lean towards those students who have that interest. And so we click in different directions.
How much control is there in the school setting to determine who should be associating with which individual? Is that something that is looked into at the level of the school system?
It shouldn't be. There is a school environment is supposed to be a safe environment. It's supposed to be an environment.
Is it always a safe environment?
No, it isn't always.
Because up to today I heard that there's a lockdown at one particular secondary school in St. Lucia, primarily because it was discovered that some of the children were gambling, and the police had to enter that learning institution in question. Don't you think that in this particular instance, children were not exposed to this, if you want to call it a vice, we therefore would have to, out of necessity, because they are confined in the school setting, be exposed to this?
But that's the society into the school. It's not far removed from the children. We look and we see what it is, win lotto and all of the different things. That's gambling at a national level.
But
you understand?
But you must be of a particular age to participate.
Right. So we tell them you must be of a particular age, but they are aware of it. And again, the natural curiosity would be to explore things. So we did that. We played cards, we played whatever. Then you start playing marbles, and then you start exchanging marbles, and all of that kind of thing. So all of these are that at different levels. As they mature, as it increases for them, as their awareness increases as well. You understand? So when it comes to that, this is the society filtering in. And so you say to students, we do not want gambling on the compound. That's where the school has jurisdiction and control. And so the school would put in whatever is necessary to ensure that they manage that particular activity on the compound, because we know that with gambling, it brings with it other vices, if you want to call it that, and other things that can happen.
Now, why are certain schools deemed to be troubled learning institutions compared to others that have a better reputation?
Really and truly, within the education system, all schools follow the very same curriculum. We do not have, for example, students at St. Mary's College follow the curriculum leading up to CSEC. So do the students at Sir Stanley John Odlum. So do the students at Beaufort Comprehensive Secondary School. Okay, so in that regard, there's no discrimination when it comes to the curriculum or the quality of the education. Let me put it that way. What you have is that we've had instances where schools had been, how would I put it, built a reputation, let's see, because we put them in terms of choice, first choice, second choice, whatnot. This is the best school, and which one is the, that kind of thing. So we begin to put people into a bracket, and if you're not scoring the high marks in maths and English and this and that, then you are not as you're not considered to be as competent as another person. So really and truly, it's how we have structured our education system in terms of identifying who we think is excellent and so on, and what that excellence represents.
What impact is this having on the psyche of students because they are stigmatized? coming from a different background, coming from a different school.
I want to say that what we have now is universal secondary education, and schools as zones. So because of the what we have built so far in terms of reputation, children in this particular zone should be attending the secondary school in their community because they are getting the very same education.
This doesn't always happen.
It doesn't happen because you tell yourself that when you put in the child's choices, you put St. Mary's College, St. Joseph's Convent, this and as you go down the rung, that's when you start to name the schools. But there's nothing that says that the quality of education that the child gets at Miku Secondary School in any way is worse, or that that child is not as competent as another child.
I think they might have a different ethos. The quality of teaching might be different. Teachers might be better qualified in one school than the other. Because, I mean, you being human, don't you think that teachers want to teach at the more prominent and stellar schools than others?
I think, to my mind, I believe that if you're genuinely a teacher, you will teach anyway. And you will impact your students because your goal is the success of the child. You are not trying to build your reputation and trying to make you look good as much as you're trying to give the child the best opportunities possible for them to be able to succeed and excel. And the teacher gets the praise by riding on the wings of the child who has been successful.
But you think it's all about reputation because...
Of course.
Because very often teachers do not show that kind of deep interest in slow students.
But I would say that is because, again, we tell ourselves we are academic minded. So if they passing the school that's giving the most pass marks, the highest grades, these are the people who matter, which should not be. This is how we see it in the society. It really ought not to be that. It ought to be that as far as possible, equal access for every child to the best quality of education. Our teachers are well trained. They've gone through teachers college. There are a lot of teachers who are operating very professionally. They are spread out throughout the islands, throughout the island schools. And there's nothing that in my experience, I taught for 17 years at Castries Comprehensive School. I started when I came out of South Louis Community College before I went to Teachers College. And I taught throughout those years. I told myself that I'm a professional educator. That's who I am. And it does not matter where that child is coming from. It is my responsibility to find what is necessary to help that child learn. And so that is what you want teachers to be able to do. But when you are told, when you have to prepare children for minimum standards in grade 2, minimum standards in grade 4, common entrance in grade 6, and then CSEC, and so on, and we're trying to get passing grades, a lot of other things suffer.
Do those things impact students in terms of how they feel about themselves, their self-esteem, having passed for a particular school where they are seen as underachievers? Their mom wanted them to pass for this particular school, but now they have passed for a particular school that is not recognized as being prominent, in the society, that does not come with, for example, the prestige and so on. Right. How does that impact some of the students in your interaction with them?
It can have an impact on some of the students, as we said, because, again, you associate prestige, you associate those students who are doing very well, and then you failure. But when we looked at the National Award of Excellence, for example, the student who earned, she got so many of the awards, and she came from Vieux Fort Comprehensive School. Now, a person will tell you, well, there are students who are doing 19 subjects, 18 subjects, 17 subjects. If they can and they're successful, by all means encourage them. The child who's doing 5 subjects and is successful needs to be encouraged as well. But because of how we perceive it and how we speak to them and how we teach them, then we create that kind of negative self-esteem, low self-esteem in their minds. As
a counselor, how do we deal with that particular issue? Do you think we are a long way off from remedying that stigma that is attached to certain learning institutions and also the prominence?
I think we need to recognize that every school has its unique school culture. And that is what the school in itself has to determine how they want to develop their school culture and how they want to make their students successful and contribute towards their school environment. I think that is the other thing too. So once you have the encouragement coming from teachers, the principal, the school, once you believe in the children and you help them to believe in themselves, then they usually come out and then they prove, they show you what they are capable of doing, and improvement in the school.
What normally happens to children who are performing poorly? Do you think that they're more likely to be violent, to act in a violent manner in the school?
I wouldn't say that they are more likely to be violent. I think what could happen is they can become frustrated, especially if they're put in a situation where they're not able to meet the skill that they're being asked. For example, if the child has a difficulty reading and that is not addressed and they have not been able to get the help that they need, taking them and asking them to read naturally is going to create some kind of anxiety for that child.
Isn't one of the negatives of USE? Where all children are expected to go to a secondary school and they're expected to cope at the same level?
Well, to some, I wouldn't say that it's negative. I think, again, what we need to do is recognize that USE is what we have, where it allows the students to, because you want students to be able to acquire their education as far as possible.
But how many students graduate after attending a particular secondary school for 5 years and they have nothing to show by way of certification or by way of having grasped certain
things? But there are things in place, because you do have students. So secondary schools, you have students who do at Form 3, the CCSLC exam. Some schools don't do it, but it's a competency-based exam. CXC at various levels has adjusted their testing, their curriculum and so on to meet some of the needs of students as they see it fit. Competency-based learning, where students have more hands-on, the introduction of SBAs to give them more opportunity for them to be able to interact with their learning a little more, and really and truly a child, as far as possible, should be able to be successful in school, except if you can identify learning difficulties and so on, which would require testing and going through, certain other diagnoses and stuff like that.
But how effective is the minimum standards when, for example, students would be tested on certain subject areas in the build-up to, let's say, common entrance, and yet still those same students will be performing poorly in that exam?
Well, I think the minimum standards, what is supposed to happen is that after that exam has been administered, it's supposed to provide a guide for where that child is performing, so that remediation can be made between that time and common
supposed
entrance.
To, but does it happen?
So whether that happens, that may be the question. I can't say.
You don't know whether those things...
It should happen at schools, but I can't tell you that I know, well, okay, this is what is being used and this is how it's being done.
As we started the broadcast this evening, we did focus on the situation in that South Florida school where some 17 students were fatally shot. In the case of St. Lucia, let's talk about school violence. What is happening in your experience, in your interaction with our students right now?
Well, with our students, you have instances of bullying and so on. And again, you will understand that of course, it's really traumatic for any child who faces that kind of bullying. It hampers their self-esteem, their safety, among other things. The bully themselves is someone who is at risk in their own way. They need help in terms of how to interact with other people, how they should treat people, maybe how they themselves are being treated. Maybe it's because they don't feel as if they're appreciated, or that that they are performing well. All of those things. So we have high levels of bullying. Now you would have children in schools, boys bantering with one another. This is normal. It becomes a problem when the child's education is jeopardized, when their safety is jeopardized, and that type of thing.
But where do you draw the line, and how do you make the distinction between the bantering and the bullying?
Because it becomes persecutory. You see, that is the thing. Children will go through their normal they will go through their normal arguments. They may have, these little skirmishes and so on and so forth. But when it becomes persecutory, when a person cannot be comfortable in their own school environment, because when every corner they take, somebody's there pushing them around or taking their stuff and that type of thing, then you know that it is something that needs attention. Sometimes they don't report it. As I was saying to a student today, I said a bystander is very important. So a bystander who observes the bullying and says nothing, to an extent, is equally guilty. It may be that they are fearful for their own selves, but at the same time, it's almost like standing and seeing something that wrong happen and doing nothing about it. So you do have incidences of bullying and so on.
Over the last few weeks, there have been several stabbing incidents over in Barbados. How do we compare ourselves to what is happening in Barbados right now with regard to those stabbing incidents? We can consider ourselves to be better off?
That's an interesting question. For one, I don't know the context of which the stabbings took place in Barbados. What I can say is when you look in other areas of society, we see a lot of stabbings taking place. The stabbing tells you that people are not resolving conflict effectively and efficiently. They're not using skills, or there are not enough opportunities for them to be able to deal with the issue at hand. Now, a lot of the times you find persons who have conflict, and when you try to ask them exactly why they're in conflict, they can't even tell you. You understand? And it's important for us to understand what is creating the conflict. Conflict a lot of the time happens, most of the time, because of how I perceive what happened to me, what I feel is going, the threat that I think there is to me. You may mean no threat to me.
There could be a little paranoia, you think?
To an extent, yes, but all of us are not paranoid. It's just that when we interact, there may be things that you may say or do that creates some level of discomfort for me. And because of how it impacts me, then it creates conflict. I will stay away from you. You understand that type of thing? And so when we talk about conflict varies for people. What it is, it's a disagreement on what values, on perspectives, on the way we do things. In businesses, in offices, you have conflict. You hear workers using all levels of obscenity about their managers. You hear managers speaking down about workers. You understand? You have that happening in schools. You have it happening all around us in the society. So we as a people have a personal responsibility to begin to understand, rather, that we model a lot of the behaviors we see repeated in the children and behaviors that are modeled by adults.
Do you think that, God forbid, our students could be copycats as far as what's happening in the schools in the United States?
Yes, and what I think we would need to do, because there's no running away from it. It's there. I believe that there are times when you would need to engage students on, what do you think about this incident? How do you think whatnot? And then you will hear from them, their perspective. One of the clips about that case in Florida said that the young man used to talk about dark things and talk about guns and wanting to shoot up and so on. And they took it for normal teen violence. That's what they said. But you must pay attention to a situation where a child is constantly talking about dark things, constantly talking about harming others, reacting to persons in a violent way whenever they find themselves in a problem. It says that child needs a help because they are not dealing with the situation effectively. In
terms of precautionary measures, do you think there's a need to beef up security in our schools?
I think there's need to beef up security because we see that a lot of things coming from the society filters into the schools. However, what I would not want to see is for us to criminalize every student. When you come face to face with a student in the school, that's who that person ought to be, a student first. You see a student first and you try to meet that student where they are, and then there will be issues and other maybe disciplinary matters that need to be dealt with. You deal with them, but for me the integrity of the student is very important. So a child does something that merits, let's say, suspension. The child must be brought to understand, okay, this is what you did. They have to take responsibility for it. this is the consequence, because the consequence is not because you did it. The consequence is attached to this particular act. And as a result of that, you're expected to face that consequence. When you're facing that consequence, it gives you also opportunity for you to think about it, do some type of resolution in your mind, and come back and say, well, okay, you know what? I recognize this or that, or I'm remaining on that side of the fence. We have to be able to engage. The young men who are angry out there, they're angry for a reason. Whether we think it's valid or not, in their minds, they're angry for a reason. The student who takes an action, there's a goal to everybody's behavior. There's a goal to our behavior. We do certain things either to get attention, we do it because we want to exert power, we do it because we want to retaliate. Sometimes we just don't do it because we don't feel that we have sufficient confidence to do it, so we withdraw into ourselves. When you see a behavior, a lot of times the action is not what is underlying, what it is. So you listen for what they didn't see.
How often do you think that after a student has gone through some kind of self-examination, that they would be true to themselves and be reasonable and accept responsibility for their actions?
Most times they would. And listen, when you're dealing with students and you ask them about disciplining one another, they are a lot more harsh than we are with what we mete out to them. You understand? Because again, for them, once they come to understand it, they will, and they recognize where they're out, they will sit back and they'll say, oh, okay. If they feel as if they're being browbeaten and they're being pushed in, what do you think they're going to do? Push back. If I'm in your personal space, the more I come into your space, the further you go back. But at some point when you realize that this is not stopping, you're going to push back. And we must understand that the nature of the teenager, especially when they go there, is to push back, to push the limits, to push the rules, to push the speed limit, to push the what. We recognize the risk. They know the risk sometimes, but the nature is for them to push it just to test themselves.
I see that the guidance counseling program was first introduced in 1992 at only 4 secondary schools. That's very late. But however, now the number of counselors within the education system has increased to 31. As far as you are aware, why so late, 1992?
I think it's just a matter of process. As we develop our educational framework, then we begin to add the different components. And so school counseling came in as part of that development. You started having schools. So schools were not built with an office for the counselor, but there were some schools. So for example, I think Castries Comprehensive is one of the schools that the Canadian government gave that school. Of course, with their background, you have counselors in schools. So that school was built with an office for the counselor, and so as we go along and as we recognize the needs and as we improve education, then you do that. At this time, we have 8 educational districts. So we've broken up into districts with the primary schools. We do not have a counselor in every primary school, but what we have is a district counselor who, in their best effort, will implement programs to help the students in the various schools develop their academic, personal, social, and career development of the child. And then in the secondary schools, you have a school counselor on the compound who is serving the students.
You're watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television with my guest, Joyce Lynn Eugene, Acting Coordinator for Guidance and Counseling, Ministry of Education. We'll be back in a moment to continue our discussion and, of course, later, your calls. Welcome back and thank you so much for staying with us once again. You're watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television. We are into the 22nd season of the program. And my guest this evening is Joyce Lynn Eugene, Acting Coordinator for Guidance and Counseling, Ministry of Education. Later we'll be taking your calls and we conclude with the clip that peaked. Let's look at the activities that were held during the course of last week. The school counselors in St. Lucia had a special week of activities. What was that all about?
Okay, well, as you mentioned earlier, school counseling has been on a lighter scale since 1992. We had 4 counselors, and over the years, we have developed school counseling in St. Lucia. However, there has not been, I would say that enough has not been done to embrace the service and the work of the school counselors in the schools. In a lot of instances, school counselors operate almost as if, or they are in the school as if they're an added person to the institution when they should be integrated into the school's program. Okay, so we wanted to be able to bring to light a lot of what the school counselors do, to emphasize the work that they do and how they fit, because they are part of the educational team in the school and of course the Ministry of Education.
And I remember during the ceremony which took place at the administrative center, financial center, former chief education officer, Ms. Husbands, Anthony, she was really stressing that you people, the counselors, need to believe in themselves because of the important role that you're playing. And I think also the education minister, Dr. Rigobert, made that same point. But what do you think can be done to really and truly highlight the work that you're doing, the work that counselors are doing in the school, and to really ensure that you're given a level of support and assistance so you can be part of the system and not feel as if you're operating on the periphery?
I think the thing about this is that when counselors were introduced to the schools, the secondary schools, it really had not been it really had not been something that was transitional. It was talked about, it was a plan, we wanted it done, and then there were a number of things that were not happening, and then Miss Anthony, being the person that she used to drive something forward, she said, you know what, we must do this. And so counselors were placed in schools. However, when counselors were placed in schools at that time, there was no particular job description that had been laid out for them, and those types of things that you would have wanted when you were walking into an employment and so on. So as we came into counseling, we built that. At this point in time, we're working on our school counseling framework, which outlines the different developmental domains for each of the children, and how these are implemented through the counseling program in collaboration with the teachers at the school. The counselor cannot and does not operate in isolation. So you have that has been taking place, but because of the way counselors came into the system, not necessarily as being employed as the teachers, that kind of thing, you did not have that gelling that you want to happen. Some schools, over time, counselors were able to work with principals and so on, and to build that their relationships, and that's what we desire.
So you're basically seen as outsiders.
Outsiders, yes. And I don't think it's necessarily because they don't want the school counselor. I believe it's because we had not understood the role of the school counselor, and how they impact and how they contribute to the school counseling program. The other thing is people are very fearful about counseling. So when they hear counseling, they immediately go into that thing of telling somebody their business and that type of thing. But a school counselor serves as an educator within the school. The students, for example, when you're dealing with their academic development, the report books and so on, they have access to that to help the student develop study skills and put in, different measures to help them succeed. The same thing goes for the personal and social development, that type of thing. So I believe it's because a lot was not understood about the school counseling program. That's why we ended up on the periphery. Now that we've been doing more, then persons are saying, okay, you know what, we have a better understanding of who you are and how it is you fit into the whole scheme of education.
Let's talk about the utilization of the services of counselors in the school, especially when it comes to providing guidance to students to make correct choices and so on. How much interaction is there between the counselor and students?
There is a lot of interaction because the counselor, part of our framework, we have our career development component of our framework. That starts at K. So there are competencies that you start with the children, develop self-awareness, and as early as that, they start to identify the different career of their parents and other people, these doctors and so on. They start to talk about what they would like to be. They start to dress up in the different things as their interest changes over time. Then of course you're going to modify. So as they come up the grades, you have different skills and different competencies that would be they would be exposed to in making those decisions. A component of that is the college readiness aspect of it. And during last year, we signed on to the ACT, which is an American college testing service where students are exposed to colleges in the US. They do the ACTs. Based on their scores, they have access to, being access to those universities to attend school. Some of them, maybe depending on how high the score, it affects the amount of tuition and that type of thing. They do college readiness with the students for Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, for University of the West Indies, whatever or wherever the child feels that they're interested in, the subject that they want to study, the career that they want to help them to match it. So for example, at Castries Comprehensive, the students select their subjects in Form 2. All through Form 1 and Form 2, the council would be working with that particular group of students. So as they come to subject selection, it would be matched based on certain assessments that the council would have done with them for them to identify whether they want to go into more science, whether they want to go which subjects they should, how they blend their subjects.
Can that be in conflict sometimes with what the parents want?
Definitely. Definitely. And that is where, again, you have instances where parents want certain things for their children, and they try to get the child to do what they want them to do. Or for the best interest of the child, they want their children to excel.
Yeah.
But you may be a doctor, that may not be what your child's interest is. If you force them into that, sometimes some of them, they get to like it. But others of them, they have a terrible time because it takes them away from what they really would want to be and who they want to be. I heard this story about a little boy. It was on one of TED Talks. And the little boy was asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he kept saying his name. And they said, no, I want you to tell me whether you want to be a doctor or what. So if I'm the one saying that, I said, no, I want to be Joycelyn. We need to allow people to be themselves. We need to allow them to find the thing that they love. We need to, because if you're doing a job that you don't like, you don't enjoy, you're going to be miserable. I love counseling.
Because I'm sure people tell you, why would you want to be a counselor? Why would you want to carry other people's burdens, try to relieve them of their burdens and help them, and then you yourself, you find yourself being encumbered and burdened and carrying that on your shoulder?
I think the benefit for me is when I see people recognizing that they do have the strength to be able to take themselves through life. Life is what's happening to them. Life is what's happening to us. So you will experience a traumatic experience. That does not define you. That does not mean that that's where you stay. You will stay there for a little while as you make the adjustments necessary. But you are supposed to recognize that in you, you have the resilience for you to be able to move. Sometimes you may not be able to do it on your own, but the counselor helps to give you that push, helps to encourage it in you, that belief in yourself.
Are counselors seeing themselves as holier than thou?
They really shouldn't. I think what it is that we believe that a counselor should be holier than thou and faultless. And if you're a counselor, you should not have a problem. Counselors are people too. And we all have our challenges. Okay? We would have had exposure in how to cope with different things, how to guide clients to cope. And I would want to say that, you sometimes you reflect that in your own self and you use the skill. Okay? But as far as possible, we have to remember that they are people too.
What kind of debriefing that you go through? You personally?
Well, personally, so during the period of the work period, you get caught up in so many different things. So many cases come to you. Some may impact you and others may not. Some impact you negatively because they may bring up experiences you've had, that type of thing. And as counselors, we are trained that if you find yourself in a case where it's bringing up things that reminds you of your own issue, you need to step back from that case. So either you make a referral or you go and you deal with whatever the issues are, because again, it comes up. As for me, at various intervals, I make my appointment. I go and I sit with my counselor. We have a talk about whatever it is. I make decisions. So, for example, if I want to study, then I call her. I say, you know what, I need an appointment. I go and I bounce off of the counselor, and then I come out of there having heard myself talk about the things that I want to do, having reflected on some of the things that I want to do. Sometimes when you tell it to a person and they say it back to you, that's when you really hear what's going on with you. And then, you move forward.
Considering the level of social disorder that we're experiencing right now and the myriad of other challenges, do you think that the wider St. Lucian public, we are utilizing those services of the counselors in St. Lucia? We're doing that sufficiently?
I don't think we are doing that sufficiently. What I would say, for example, you have your emergency first responders. I can't say that I know what level of debriefing they get. But these are the people who respond to the accidents. They see so much carnage and then they go through things. They need to be debriefed. The police need to be debriefed at various times. The nurses at the hospitals in the ER need to be debriefed. Some of those doctors who have clients who die on the table, that type of thing. So at various levels, persons need to access it. Now, somebody would tell you, the hardest person to teach is a teacher, and the worst person to try to treat in a hospital is a doctor, because we always think that we're okay. But really and truly, if you don't take care of yourself, I cannot trust that you can take care of me. When you come into a situation, there's an accident, before you try to help the person who's in the accident, you have to check for your own safety. So what I encourage the counselors to do, and that's why part of our week we had self-care activities. And the self-care activities, some of it was simple. We had a district counselor with her counselors. What did they do? They went out and they played tennis. They got somebody to take them through learning tennis, and they just had this opportunity where they ran around the court, they sweat and that type of thing. Some persons, they took their group, they went to the beach, they had breakfast, they spend time talking and so on, debriefing one another. They do that at different times, so it doesn't take much. And then coming out of that, you are rejuvenated and you're better able to serve the people that you.
How much do you think is it a danger for us to not to subject ourselves to counseling amidst all what we're experiencing, the negatives that we're experiencing right now, whether it's in our homes, in the workplace, on the roads, in terms of motorists trying to maneuver within the traffic and all that's taking place and so on? How do you think that could impact us if we deny ourselves of such services? Because I know a lot of us deny ourselves of this service.
A lot of us deny ourselves of this service because of fear, because of
out of
stigma.
ignorance too.
To an extent, yes, but a lot of the time it's because of fear and shame. For example, you have a lot of men who will not access the counseling service. Why? Because we've said counseling is for people who have problems. Now, in my experience, when I've done work with men, private counseling with men, a lot of the times they progress a lot faster than women, because men are solvers. They want to get things done. So they will hesitate to come in. But when they come in, they actually move through the process. You understand? A lot quicker. And it's only when they've risked that a lot of them walking away from that, realizing that, you know what, it wasn't bad at all. All it is meeting with someone who is objective, who is not in any way emotionally attached to what I'm going through. And so that person allows me a hearing, allows me to hear myself, and then says to me, now, knowing what you know about yourself, what are some of the decisions you think you can make moving forward that will help you to move yourself to the place? Counselors don't give advice. We don't tell you what to do. We don't make the decisions for you. But what we will do is walk alongside you, give you the encouragement that is needed, help you navigate and identify the things that you think will benefit you, and do the best with the service. However, when it comes to children, that's a little bit different, because you have a responsibility to the well-being and safety of the child. The counselor has a duty to report, just like every other adult who has jurisdiction for where that child is. So you have a duty to report to protect that child. If the child is a harm to themselves, if someone is threatening the well-being of the child, that type of thing, then you don't have a choice there.
You're watching Newsmaker Live right here on DBS Television. When we come back, we'd love to hear from you. Your calls, stay with us. Welcome back. We'll put the telephone number on screen right now so that you can call with your questions and comments for my guest. Once again, she is Joycelyn Eugene, Acting Coordinator for Guidance and Counseling in the Ministry of Education. So we take your calls right now on the program between now and 10 o'clock. What about collaboration between counselors in St. Lucia and the other social services?
Yes, this is a very important relationship because the school counselor has jurisdiction over students in school, in their school. The district counselors, they have the primary schools in their district, so they have jurisdiction to work with these students. When it comes to certain services, for example, in cases where you have child care needs and so on, it must be referred to human services. When these cases are referred to human services, they will assign a caseworker, they go into the families and so on, but counselors do not have, that they are not empowered to do that. Sometimes when cases are referred, for example, to human services, if it's as they go through their process of dealing with it, it may hamper the work that the counselor is.
I'll give you an opportunity to speak further on this, but we have a call. Good evening, Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Yes, good evening.
Hi, good evening to you, caller.
I just wanted to really say that this is a fantastic program. It's about time that we speak more about counseling and counselors. I'm not a counselor, but I'm really touched and really happy about seeing Miss Eugene?
Yes, Joycelyn Eugene.
Joycelyn Eugene. I am happy to hear her about counseling in the schools and profession itself and just the schools, on a whole. One of the things I wanted to talk about was that of confidentiality when it comes to the counselors at the school, because very often it's either a stigma or it has happened where students talk about, them not feeling comfortable with some of the counselors for fear that their personal information or their business, so to speak, is out there, or they feel that other people know, what they are going through. And I have, heard of situations where students may have something going on and other students are privy to that sort of, situation. So I just wanted to hear the counselor speak of, issue of confidentiality and how that affects the students and the school children having issues and bringing it to the fore or bringing it to the counselor's attention.
Thank you so much for calling, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Yes, confidentiality is one of the most important tenets of our profession. The thing about confidentiality is that persons, as the caller said, sometimes are fearful to share information. The other thing is you must realize that we have limits to confidentiality. So as I mentioned a little earlier, in a case where the child is at risk, in a case where the child may disclose, and even before, once we get consent, because the children who are below the age of 16, consent must be obtained from the parent in order for them to enter the counseling program, the counseling relationship. Once we have consent for that child to enter the counseling program, it means that you have the responsibility to protect the integrity of the child's information. So, but there are times when cases come to the counselor, it has already been discussed with the teacher, maybe some friends know different things, that type of a thing. And so we do not have full control over how much information may be out there, right? However...
My apologies again, we have a call. Good evening, Newsmaker Live, you're on the air.
Yeah, I would like to speak to Mr. Timothy and the lady, please.
Yes, sir, you're on the air. Go ahead, please, with your contribution.
Oh my, I touched a wrong button there, which I was trying to bring down the volume.
But go ahead, it's okay. It's okay, go ahead, please. I'm listening.
Yeah, yeah. Mr. Timothy.
Oui.
Good evening, Mr. Timothy and the lady.
I'm listening to you. You are on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Miss Lady, I'm very happy the way you acting and the way you're really a teacher. But bear in mind, I am not an education person, but I have good understanding. Would you mind accept me in KRL?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Nou ka kote ou?
Madame, mwen men talon wak chaye kou, ple mwen chaye mane ou ka operate adan sistem nou ye la. But la nyo ba yo lo men nou la, mwen wish ko deja komponi ki men ou ka handle sa. Because right now mwen men ka ediko komo from ou zan teacher pou mwen. Ok, mwen te ou di, ani man bay ki te rey fe, gay mwen la se chine kon ale, si ba le off, mi di ma zi twak la vi.
Oui.
Mwen te ou di, ani man bay ki te rey fe bay ki mouve, alors là, vous pouvez parler plus pour faire un commentaire pas bon. Après, vous parlez plus bien pour pas dire hacker plus. Vous dites que maintenant encore, si la demande est pour dresser le maïs, vous pouvez venir hash et puis. So, moi, vraiment, supposing ou un maïs qui a fait bail qui pas bon. Avec un même fait bail, vous faites pour monsieur, un manière pour pas faire bail qui va bon, faire comprendre. Et qui aurait une 6. En ça, on va faire. Et on va faire ça, on va faire. La maman m'a dit, dis-moi s'il vous plaît, qui ça, on va faire? Est-ce que vous mettez dans l'école là, parce que c'était bail, on va faire qui veut mauvais, et tout le monde parle pas attendre. Bon, moi, je comprends la supplémentaire. Qui m'a rendu qui ça, s'il vous plaît? Exactly, end of the question.
Kokakou, you encore soit say, right?
La boui.
La boui, ok, merci.
Yes.
Bonsoir. Ok. Burton Patwa watch on.
Lani moma kay sa dia patwa
Oui.
pièce. Mais lani tout ti mamae différent. Mama kani 8-ish. Ek yo denye différent. Maman mwen te di nou 8 ek mwen sab nou denye différent. Nou ka som yon alot, mais nou différent. So lani temperament, c'est ça nou ka kouye. Tout ti mamae ni an manye yo. Ek se parent la ni pou sav manye pou yo deal epi différence la ki a ti mamae yo.
Mais commissaire a dit, l'année des autres, les autres, yo pas à côté, yo pas vle tan.
And that is their temperament. So these children are a lot more, we would say stubborn. That's what we would say in terms of a child. But when it comes to their personality, that child has a particular way of behaving, a way of functioning, the way they try to understand things. Some children need assessment. So within the Ministry of Education, we have the multidisciplinary team, which does the assessment to identify whether the children have learning disabilities, whether they conduct this or, well, not, it doesn't diagnose, but it would give you those areas that you can start off with for you to identify whether they're children who are oppositional defiant. By that it means persons in authority create a challenge for them because their temperament is such that they're a lot more outspoken, they're a lot more aggressive, they will challenge. They think they're children, you will put them there and you'll tell them stay there and they won't move. I have my 2 sons. There's one, I will tell him stay there. I will go to Timbuktu and come back and he'll be there. The other one, if I say that, he says, Mommy, where are you going? How long must I sit there? I'm going to use the computer while you know, that type of a thing. And so you need to know the difference in the children. In a case where a child is misbehaving and they are not changing, there are other things that probably factors that we have not gotten to that is creating that. Sometimes it's a hormonal imbalance. Sometimes it's a biological condition. Maybe parents may have been using other things that created stimulants in those children. So their attention is very high. We are told that your attention is your age plus 1 thing. So if I'm 30 and my attention is 31, after half an hour, I can't listen to anybody tell me anything about anything. Far less when you have children 5, 6, 7, and 8. You have to stimulate them, keep them engaged, and so on. And I believe, as a counselor, I will work with a perpetrator, a person who does the act. I've worked with persons in prison, because I believe even those people, in their mind's eye, unless you can diagnose them with a condition, had a reason why they felt they did what they did. Sometimes they are emotionally hijacked. So you have a case where partners, friends, somebody gives somebody an old joke and then it sets him off. He does something, he stabs his friend. When he comes out, he says, but Gassa, you killed your own partner. And he said, no, Gassa, no, that's not what happened. He lost it in a moment. His intention was not to kill his friend, but that's the outcome of it. We're going to have to deal with that and let him go through whatever the consequences are and come back to a place where he says, you know what, I am sorry. that's not what I intended. Other persons who are psychopaths now, they have a problem, they have a condition, it's a mental condition. That person will continually repeat. So you have your serial killer, your serial rapist, and those persons who, for whatever reason, lack the ability to be able to distinguish right from wrong and that correct action.
So that's why what? You either send them to prison for life or send them to the gallows?
You do that.
I know we enter into a
because
different area there, but capital punishment and all that.
you do that because you really don't know if you have the resources to take them through the steps for rehabilitation. And most times we want payback. So that's the other thing. If this has happened to my family, I want to hurt you as much, or I want you to feel the kind of hurt that I'm going through. So if you say forgive, to forgive is almost as if you're weak. You understand? And these are the things that we have when we're dealing with interaction. We have to teach children. You know, you tell a child, don't hit, and you hit them.
We have a call. This is Newsmaker Live. Go ahead with your contribution, caller. Okay, we lost that call. But earlier you were talking about collaboration.
Yes.
With the social agencies.
With the social agencies. And so each agency has a responsibility to the well-being of the child. The children are the ward of the state, especially those who are minors. And so within the schools, there's only so much that we can do from our end. However, the counselor's role is to get that child focused back so that they can be successful as they're going through their challenges. When it comes to human services has jurisdiction, in the homes and that type of thing. And so they also offer a level of service to that child. What you would want to see is that what the school is doing, what human services is doing, or probation services, or any of these other services works in tandem toward so that it provides the kind of support that the child needs.
Why do you think that the collaboration effort is lacking?
I think it's simply because we're all trying to fulfill our role.
Or you think we have our own turf that we protect?
Yes, we're fulfilling our role, but
producer, we have a call? Okay.
Yeah, we're fulfilling our roles, but what we need to realize is that our role will be better fulfilled if we work together. And when you're working with a child, for example, that child is a client of the school counselor, the child is a client of human services, this is the same person. So really and truly, whatever happens should be a collaborative effort between these two agencies for the well-being of the child.
You think the provision of resources would be one of the major areas of concern for the various sectors? We have
Naturally.
a call. Good evening. This is Newsmaker Live. You're on the air.
Good evening.
Hi. Good evening to you, ma'am.
I have a question for Mrs. Eugene.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Mrs. Eugene, don't you think that one counselor per district is not enough? Because in some schools we don't see the counselor at all for the term. The counselor is always out at other schools. What do you say about that?
Okay.
Thank you so much.
This speaks to counselor-student ratio. Again, remember we said that we are building school counseling. So the ideal, Tim, is one counselor to 250 students. Ideal. Then we go up and we say, well, okay, one counselor, let's say to 500 students. There are very few schools in St. Lucia that have a population of less than 500. Okay? When it comes to the district, if the district has 15 primary schools, infant primary school, one district counselor serves all of those students. So for example, District 2, which is where you have Camille, Carmen, Rennie, and those schools, over 3,000 students, one district counselor. And that district counselor has to organize programs to meet the needs of students at various developmental levels in those schools from K to 6.
Clearly, that's not enough.
That's not enough. What we have done is that we have, the counselors again, what we have been trying to do is to identify a point teacher, someone in the school who can assist, kind of liaise with between the school counselor and the school to help us get access to the students who may need counseling and maybe some of the interventions that they require. So we have programs that we implement in the schools, the Second Step program, which is to help the social emotional development of the child. We have the pre-referral interventions where we've given them guidelines for how to recognize at-risk students and so on.
We have a call. Good evening. Go ahead with your contribution, caller.
Good evening.
Hi.
Mr. Foley. Good evening, Miss Eugene.
Good evening to you, ma'am. Good
well,
evening.
thank
Okay.
you.
How are you, Miss Eugene?
I'm well, thank you.
It's been a long time. Okay,
Yes.
I just want to ask a question. What people are talking about privacy when it comes to your students as a
Privacy.
counselor.
Mhm.
Are the principals and teachers made aware that whatever information that you have between you and a student is confidential? You would only have to let the principal and teachers know if it affects the rest of the school.
Mhm.
But I don't think some principals understand that it is there is confidentiality between you and that student,
Mhm.
between a student
And the
and
counselor.
a counselor.
Mhm.
And a lot of principals infringe on that privacy.
Mhm.
And I think that is why students do not feel free to talk to the counselor, because they feel the minute the principal and other teachers know about it, it becomes everybody's business.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the things that the counselors have to make principals know, that whatever a child tells me is in confidence. If it is affecting the school or something that the principal should know, I think if I tell you as a counselor, I tell you as a principal, from counselor to principal, it is supposed to be confidential. It's not supposed to go through all the staff and so on. And I think that is one of the problems that a lot of students have, that they don't trust counselors in the schools anymore.
Okay.
But Ms. Eugene, it's nice to see you still doing good work.
Thank
We
you.
went back a long time, Technical Institute.
Oh,
I don't know
wow.
if you know that. Right?
Yes,
Have a great time.
yeah.
Thank you so much for calling. Yeah.
I want to start off by saying confidentiality is not secrecy, and there's a clear distinction that we want to make. So, for example, a minor child is the responsibility of the parent. The counselor does not keep information from the parent concerning that child.
Right.
You understand? Because that's the child. The parent has rights to the knowledge of what's going on with the child. When it comes to principals, you will understand that the principal is the one in charge of the plant. They're responsible for all the students on the plant and so on. So naturally they would want to know what's going on with their students and so on. That is understandable. And I believe that the counselor functioning efficiently can foster that kind of relationship with the principal, so that they would be able to share levels of information that does not compromise the integrity of the child or the child's information. The same thing goes for teachers, because it's a collaborative effort team. So a teacher will refer a child to the counselor. I see nothing wrong in me saying to the teacher, Miss, thank you for the referral and I will do my best concerning the child. There may be instances when that referral is made that the teacher the counselor may need to speak with the child, of course, and say, well, okay, you know what, there's some adjustments we need to make in the classroom for you. Of course, you have to bring the teacher back into the situation. You will not disclose all of the details of what's going on, but you have to say to the teacher, well, okay, you know what, miss, in order to help this child learn better, we would like you to shift the child to the center front of the classroom, or give them guidelines as to how we can deal with that child. So we develop an IEP plan or behavior modification plan sometimes for some of the children, and you give levels of information that are necessary. The thing about us, we always want the details. We want the nitty-gritty of everything. And so sometimes teachers, principals, other persons dig into the details. And when they cannot get that, then they are dissatisfied with the counselor. The counselor is not hoarding information for them to be able to take and do what with, as much as they're using that information to guide what takes place in the classroom and to guide parents as to what can be done to give the child the best services possible. That's what it ought to be. Of course, there are areas where I would believe that, maybe we would have fallen short or we would have needed to make adjustments naturally, and that's what we're working towards.
But what people are afraid of is it's a small society, and if you tell one person, if it gets out, of a particular realm, then it's chaos for people, and that could come to haunt them down the road. I mean,
Understandably
when
so.
students graduate from a secondary school, when they enter the workplace and so on, especially if they're sexually abused or sexually molested and so on.
But you see, that information is usually not coming from the counselor.
We have a call. That's our final call. Good evening, Newsmaker Live. You're on the air.
Hi, good evening. Just to follow up on that confidentiality conversation, what, if anything is in place when teachers themselves violate that level of confidentiality that I'm sure the counselors are trying to, ascertain, with the students and whatever that is going on? Because the counselor did mention sometimes if principals or teachers dig enough and they do not get the information, all of a sudden now they have a problem with the counselor. What my problem is a lot of the time with the schools is the performance indicator of those teachers. Because you have teachers teaching all over the place, and teachers are wonderful people. They're supposed to be the best people in the world, blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, we still have teachers that do not come off as professional. And so some of those teachers, when they find out certain things, and even to the point of harassing certain students, or, divulging that information around the place, what, if anything, is in place to remedy that, to discipline that teacher? How do teachers get disciplined? What is there in place for that? Because it seems that nothing happens to those teachers who violate, that confidentiality that's supposed to be existing when students report their own issues or their parents report the issues.
Thank you so much for calling, ma'am. That was our final call.
Yeah.
Your reaction?
Really and truly, I don't know that within the school itself, for example, principal to teacher, that there's anything really that can be done except for the principal to probably bring it to the attention of the teacher if a report is made. But if there's a level of confidentiality that has been breached, naturally a parent can file a report concerning that and have that matter, I suppose, investigated and so on. But the counselor, again, the counselor works collaboratively with, does not have jurisdiction over teachers or any of those persons. What we want to do is foster the relationship so that at the end of the day, we can have a smooth, well-oiled machine in terms of what we offer as a service to the students in the schools.
Final comments from you, ma'am?
I really want, and it's important for us to understand what school counseling is about and what the school counselors do. I would want to encourage parents to ask the questions. I would like teachers to, yes, go to the counselor and inquire a little bit more about what they do. Understand, however, that when it comes to disclosing the children's information, that in itself is something that the counselor must do must consider how they're disclosing any information concerning a child, because at the end of the day, their responsibility is to protect that child, protect the integrity of their client, and of course to do everything possible to ensure that that child experiences success at school with very little discomfort as possible.
Joycelyn Eugene, thank you so much for being my guest on this evening's Newsmaker Live. And by the way, she's the acting coordinator for guidance and counseling in the Ministry of Education. Thank you so much for watching the broadcast, and thank you so much for contributing via your calls. If it's Wednesday, it's Newsmaker Live. Time now for the clip that peaked. Once again, as a broadcast, my name is Timothy Polion, wishing you a very good evening. See you next time, and good night.